This week on the Vinyl Guide, we are talking records and music with Kellii Scott of the band Failure and many other ventures. Kellii, Failure seems to have developed a very loyal legion of fans. I mean, loyal across multiple decades, which is quite fascinating. What do you attribute this to?
Um, you know, I would have to say the internet. I think it started as, there were probably a few people out there who maybe had copies of the record, made copies of the record and gave them to friends and things like that. But I don't think that by itself would have grown our fan base as much as it has in the last 20 years. I think it's definitely the file sharing. I think as soon as that came along, just the multiplier effect got our music out there to a lot more people at a much more, modest pace. Not quite the snail's crawl it would have been when you were like duping CDs to cassettes and things like that.
So in a way, file sharing you've been one of the bands that have benefited from that technology coming into play.
Well, yes and no. Obviously, when people share files, you don't get paid for it, which with a modest-sized band such as ours means quite a bit. But it's positive because we were broken up at the time, so it just expanded our fan base. So when we did come back, we could afford to go out on tours and do the majority of the stuff that, most bands can't do on our own. Because we did have some money coming in to, just sort of replenish the coffers as we went along. It's a double-edged sword.
Like maybe your absence had built up a bit of a hunger for people to be able to then see you guys live and hear the new music and pay for it this time around.
Certainly. And the mystery, of, like, you remember that movie, Eddie and the Cruisers, like how they just kept getting bigger and bigger as the folklore got like, more mysterious and, sort of that same thing, cause there wasn't the possibility of ever seeing us play live, so it just added that much more drama to the whole thing, and people want what they can't have.
Yeah. Supply and demand.
Yeah.
Before we get to all the current stuff that's happening and the new album and the tour and the shows that you're doing, let's go back. How did you originally get started in the music industry?
That would be, let me see, I moved here in 1987, like a week out of high school. And
here being Los Angeles.
In Los Angeles from Orlando, Florida. It was the height of the 80s, the hair metal and all that kind of stuff. And I was still pretty young. I was like 17, so I was definitely into that kind of stuff then. That was more or less the scene. And let's just say I quickly picked up a job that afforded me the ability to meet, a lot of famous like rock stars and people in the industry. So I started meeting people fairly quickly.
What job was that?
It wasn't a legal profession, so I won't even mention it.
Oh.
But let's just say I got to get in free to all the clubs and parties. Pretty big in the 80s. Like I went along with that whole hair metal party scene.
You sold to Aquanet.
Close. Pretty close. I just started meeting people and, wound up in this band that was pretty tight in the scene at the time called Liquid Jesus. And I think I ran into those guys probably after I was here for maybe 6 to 8 months. And we had kind of a buzz and, we were playing like 2-3 times a week. Wound up getting a record deal and, traveling and putting out a couple records. And it all just kind of took off from there. I think at a certain level where, people can see you play more often. If you're fairly decent, you, especially as a drummer, tend to get asked to play a lot.
So if you're a drummer with a van, you get all the gigs.
Yeah, I didn't have a van. Oh. I had a Chevy Monza for a little while, but I totally neglected it and ran it into the ground. I think it wound up getting towed or something.
So you're playing with Liquid Jesus. What happened to Liquid Jesus? Like, what was the next step after Liquid Jesus?
After Liquid Jesus, I was in that was probably from like, I'd say 88, 89, 90. I ran into another band who actually was close with Liquid Jesus. We would do a lot of gigs and stuff together called Dumpster. And I left Liquid Jesus. The lead guitar player or self-imposed band leader and I weren't really getting along very well. And it kind of caused me to have second thoughts. And I was asked by this other band, Dumpster, if I wanted to play with them. They were looking for a drummer. So I just kind of went from one band to the next, and Dumpster was doing fairly well. We had, a couple labels around town that were courting us, but unfortunately we had the singer in the band had a pretty bad drug problem. And after like a year or two of that kind of imploded. Then I sort of went freelance for, I'd say about 6 or 8 months, where I literally was playing with everybody, like 4, 5, 6 times a week. I was playing with a different band like every night. And around that same time, I came home one afternoon, and there were like 3 or 4 messages on my machine. I think one was from Ken. One was from Tom Morello telling me about Ken and Failure. And the other one was, I think the other one was from maybe one of the guys in Wool, who was a band that I was playing with a little bit at the time. It was 2 of the guys from The Scream and the bass player, Al Block from Concrete Blonde. And he and Ken, Pete, the lead singer from The Scream, or from Wool, were speaking because they were both looking for drummers. So they were kind of exchanging names. And Pete had passed my number along to Ken. It was just this really weird thing where I came home one day and there were, like I said, 3 or 4 messages telling me about this band Failure.
And at that point, had you heard of Failure? Were you familiar with them?
I think I had vaguely heard of them. I remember one gig in particular, seeing a poster for. They had done a show at the Lingerie, which was a place I played quite often with different bands, with this band called Sandy Duncan's Eye. And I think Ride was on that show also. So I hadn't heard them. I didn't really know what they were about, but I had definitely heard of them. So I was definitely going into it blindly. And I think shortly after that, I spoke to Ken, and he and I set up an audition for later on in the week. And I actually almost completely blew the gig. I just had so much stuff going on that I had completely forgotten about the audition and didn't show up. And Ken called me that night, needless to say, pretty upset about me not showing up. And we set up another. The problem was he was getting ready to go out of town. He was going over to spend some time with a friend of his in Europe. And I had asked, well, why don't we just set up the audition with Greg and I? So Greg auditioned me. We ran through like the first 3 songs that are on Magnified, Moths and Let It Drip and Frogs. I think we literally ran through them once. And Greg seemed pretty sure that I was the dude. So we went and called Ken, and he let Ken know that he had found the dude. And then it got even weirder. Like a week later, Ken got home. And then Greg left town on a family vacation with his family, his mom and dad and sister, like this annual thing that they did every year. And then when we were all in town, I think we rehearsed for like maybe a week or 2 and went out on tour with Tool. And that lasted, I don't know, probably a month. It was the better part of that year. That would have been 1994. I joined the band in 93. Like the end of 93.
So Failure had already been signed to Slash. They had an album, Comfort.
They had an album, yeah.
And so the drummer change happened. You slotted in there, and really after a week or 2 of practice with the band, you were then out on the road. Okay.
Yeah, it was really quick. It was really, really quick. It was that thing that like most bands work for a few years at the least to like secure a record deal. And then, maybe even then they might get to go out on the road for like a month or 2. It was just everything at once, It was like, bam, you're in an established band. Bam, you're going out on tour for a while. You got to give up your apartment. Yeah, it was a whirlwind.
It seems like in the early 90s, there was that community in Los Angeles with, like you say, Tool, Rage Against the Machine, Failure, several other bands that were really tight-knit. Was that just a sign of the times, or was there something, I guess, palpable about what was happening at that point in Los Angeles?
I even having been out here in the 80s, for whatever people may or may not think about, all the sort of over the top stuff that was going on with those types of bands, they were a very tight knit community. In the 90s in LA was the same way. Like people genuinely had a sort of camaraderie, and were willing to help out with stuff. And it seems today things are much more fractured and bands seem to be going it alone a lot more. I'm constantly like hearing about bands like not knowing other bands to build shows with and those kinds of things. Like, yeah, in the 90s, I mean, that was a pretty predominant thing. Like every band had like, a few bands that they were really, really tight with, and then probably, a couple other like half a dozen bands that they were at least on a first name basis with or saw out all the time, or, there was definitely more of a community.
Well, I guess the only way back then to be able to really get gigs and build a fan base is to play live and to circulate and be out there. I mean, nowadays people can be much more insulated with the YouTube and tweeting and that sort of thing. They can...
Yeah, and that may be the thing. That may be the thing, that there are definitely more tools that will enable you to do a lot of the stuff that you had to do back then. You had to pass out flyers, which meant you had to go out to clubs and you had to meet people. It was definitely a very sort of face-to-face, and now it seems a lot of people do advertising online, and it just doesn't seem, I think with technology in general, people seem to be interacting with one another a lot less.
So you hit the road with Tool, and Tool have always been very vocal about their appreciation of failure. I'm assuming that you're aware of the buzz that they helped build for the band.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. I mean, that's very, very obvious. I mean, other than the internet, I mean, Tool is definitely our second biggest ally. Their rhetoric about, how they felt about us all the time on stage, even when we played with them, like they would come on stage and play with us, and, they were just very, very gracious and did a lot to promote the band. That's for sure.
Yeah. They're not a very vocal band. They don't put a lot out there, but one of the things they did put out there is, they cited Failure as an influence, which I think probably made tens of thousands of people run to their record stores asking for a Failure album.
Yeah, I'm sure it lends itself for that, because they don't say a whole lot. When they do, people really listen and kind of take them seriously.
Well, that's great. So you hit the road with Tool, and then when do you come back and do and start recording Magnified?
Well, Magnified was already recorded. We were touring on Magnified with Tool. We did the U.S. I think like maybe 1.5 full-time U.S. and Canada full tour, and we also did like probably 2.5 months in Europe with them. So altogether, it was probably, somewhere around 6 months of touring.
And Magnified, how did Magnified sell at the time?
It didn't.
Didn't? Okay.
It didn't. I think the label really loved the record, and the band really loved the record. But I just don't think there was enough publicity and marketing. And I know when we were playing with Tool to all those people were having a really hard time going to stores and getting records. And of course there was no iTunes and there was no internet, so you couldn't just like order it. Back then the big limitation to being on those giant tours was there was no product for people to buy afterwards.
So when you get back to Southern California after touring this album, several continents, 6 months, playing to some huge crowds and getting really good reception. However, the record doesn't sell. What's the conversation going like into the creation of what became Fantastic Planet?
I think we were definitely generally a little bit bummed out, that more didn't happen on Magnified. And I think when we started Fantastic Planet, we had all probably to some degree felt that, this may be the last record, because, I mean, the rule of thumb is, if you have 2 unsuccessful records, you don't tend to stay around. Mm-hmm. Or you don't get the support of your label. You usually get dropped. A lot of people get dropped after 1 unsuccessful record. Luckily, our label definitely supported what was going on. So they kind of gave us carte blanche to do another record, but it was decided that, if it was potentially going to be the last record, it was going to be the greatest record.
On your terms.
We were going to take a lot more. Yeah, we were going to take a lot more risks. We were going to rethink the whole way that we do records. That record basically became, the band got a house and wrote and recorded the record all by ourselves. And then more or less turned that in with a really strong video idea, which would have been Stuck on You. That was definitely complete control, and nobody heard it. We didn't allow anyone to come up to the house until we were finished with the record, for the most part. So I think the effect was definitely, we were pretty bummed out after all that hard work. And I think Fantastic Planet wound up being the outlet for our sort of a little bit of anger, but a lot of disappointment. And certainly, we could see the end coming near, and the only thing left within our power to do was make this one record that we could all, just be proud of.
And you chose to do it without a producer. Previously, you had Steve Albini. You had some others that
and that was part of the problem. Part of the problem was, especially as Ken became more and more experienced, when they did the record with Albini, they had never been in a studio before. They didn't know what click tracks were. Like, they were really green as far as making records. Like, they knew how they wanted to sound, but they had no idea yet to get from what was in their head to an end product. So it just seemed necessary to use other people to sort of facilitate that. And it kept not working out. I know there were a lot of shortcomings in that Albini record. We don't really play a whole lot off of that record. I don't even think anyone other than probably me has listened to that record in, 10 years. And Magnified is a little bit more of the same, where it was more of the band producing and recording and a lot more control over the record. But then there was someone who was mixing it, and there was someone who was engineering it. And the engineer had a couple ideas on there that, I think when Ken looks back, especially from a sound perspective, he just kind of cringes. He knows if he was doing it right now, he could have done it a lot better. So it definitely naturally moved into a direction of just, we're not going to make those mistakes again. And along the way had built up the tools to be able to just facilitate the ideas that are inside you a lot better.
Fantastic Planet seems like it's definitely matured. There's a clear difference between certainly Comfort, but Magnified and Fantastic Planet. Fantastic Planet seems more thematic. It seems more connected. I believe Greg is experiencing more with the soundscapes, which become really kind of a thumbprint for Failure's sound.
Yeah.
Has there been any discussion about perhaps even revisiting some of those old tracks with those new tools that you have now to be able to express those ideas?
I think we definitely do to one degree, the way we play the songs now, because we're performing them a lot, most of the songs live. So there's definitely, when it comes to sonics and things like that, a reinterpretation or just when you use new technology on old stuff, it's inherently going to sound newer and more vibrant and fuller and richer, just because the capabilities were limited back then. Like even now, like when we went out on tour for Fantastic Planet, we had to get Troy in the band because we needed 4 members to perform it. And right now, like you're literally talking to me, I'm in a rehearsal room And today's our first day of rehearsal to play. It's the 20-year anniversary of Fantastic Planet. So we're going to play the entire record as a three-piece, just the core band from start to finish over the next month. We're going to do a little tour of the U.S. So we have, and there's actually one, I don't know if you've heard it. It was a little obscure. Like when we did that 2014 show here in Los Angeles, like the big comeback tour, Hey, We're Back. Mm-hmm. We had re-recorded a version of Solaris, which is on Fantastic Planet, which is pretty different. Like it has the same words and sort of general melody to it, but it's like halftime, and it's quite different. It's still haunting and the same in that aspect of the way it feels. But musically, we definitely took some twists and turns and a few liberties here and there. But that wound up, we did that to put on a little 7-inch, which we gave to the first 250 ticket holders for that first reunion show.
So revisiting and reinterpreting some of the older tracks is part of the journey you guys are on.
Yeah, and we've, or maybe I have. Like I've got this bright idea. Because our masters are still owned by Warner Brothers, and there's I feel okay saying this because you're over in Australia. There's still a little bit of acrimony between us and our back catalog and Warner Brothers, and we've kicked around the idea of re-recording some of that stuff so we own the masters. Just so we can have control over. That's like a really big part of our legacy. And like, even now, like we managed to, speak to Warner Brothers, and through a lot of wheeling and dealing and just, frankly, a big pain in the butt, we managed to talk them into letting us reproduce a very small number of vinyl of Fantastic Planet, for this 20-year occasion. But other than that, like no CDs, no, like nothing. Like they won't even let us touch the masters. Like it's really kind of weird and like a spy novel or something. I don't know.
even though there's money to be had, which is probably what their first priority is.
Yeah, and they're totally off base and wrong. There really isn't any. There really isn't any money to be had. I think they've gotten the bulk of their money. It's not like even now, like when we reprint these, they're not selling like hotcakes. But it's just, when you have a record like that and you don't have any control over, being able to use that part of your legacy to sort of like enrich what you're doing now, it's kind of like starting as a new band in a lot of ways.
In 2010, the band reissued Fantastic Planet on vinyl. And I
think there were like 1,000 copies of that.
That went really quick, and those copies go for hundreds of dollars now.
And that's another reason we want to reprint these records. Like that's insane. Like no one should be paying, like we were talking about earlier, more than $20-$30 for an album. Mm-hmm. That's just not right. Yeah, and I see what you're saying. Like I've seen them on eBay and Amazon for like $300, and that's another really good reason to, somebody to reissue that stuff. If not us, at least them, because nobody should be charging that amount of money. Yeah, it drives me crazy.
So when you see a failure Fantastic Planet sell on eBay for $200 or $300, you don't like that?
No, it's insane. It's a good record, but come on, like $200 or $300, that's crazy. Like there may be a few records in existence worth that much money. Certainly not a failure record. I think people should be able to buy a failure record for what it's worth, like whatever the market value is. And even that, like, again, back to what we were talking about earlier, just the records are so expensive now. Mm-hmm. Like you can't get anything for under like $30 or $40. It seems like, or apparently from the reports, like there were more records sold than downloads last year or something crazy like that. Like LPs outsold every other medium of music.
Yeah, they're certainly outselling CDs and and any other physical media. I don't know about downloads. Yeah, people certainly have revisited records and the whole meaning around that, and it's one of the reasons for the success of our podcast is because we talk to people who collect records, and what a high price often does is it drives the product only to the people with the deepest pockets.
Yep.
And you also get people who don't listen to the records. They collect them because, I don't want to pull that one out because it's worth $400, and I'd rather keep it in its wrapper or keep it pristine rather than,
it steers people towards downloading more stuff too, because that's obviously cheaper. People don't want to have to spend a lot of money, and now you've got this whole thing where people can listen to all the Failure records for free on Spotify or, all those other streaming things. I mean, that's another can of worms that we probably don't even have time to get into.
So when Fantastic Planet first came out, how was the reception? Were you guys, obviously you were proud of the album. Were you happy with the reception it had in the market?
Yeah. I mean, we've been, I think the hardest thing for a band to achieve is the respect of your peers. I think the one thing that has really given us the drive, through all the ups and downs is we've always had a lot of really, really talented friends and peers that have always been pushing behind us, cheering us on. And I think that's the most valuable thing. And I think it's definitely one of the things that got us through not reaching that, commercial success. Because in the back of our minds, like we knew that we had something more valuable. It's kind of a double-edged sword. Like it, doesn't keep you from having to go out and get a regular job and trying to play music at night and doing those kinds of things. But, having the respect of other musicians is like the Holy Grail. Not just anybody gets that. So in that respect, like there's never been a record that wasn't well received. It wasn't maybe commercially well received. But, at the very least, like we've been able to enjoy the fact that when we finish a record, like we can take it to, a couple really credible sources that we know, and they're just like, wow, like you guys have done it again. Like, I'm really proud of you. Like, this is a great record. Like, I wish I would have made this record. And there's definitely something to be said about that.
And Fantastic Planet may not have had the commercial success, but the band was really on a strong momentum. That you had the success of that single for the Depeche Mode tribute album, which was phenomenal. And then it seemed like
Stuck on You did very well.
It seemed like you guys were going from strength to strength to strength. Why stop there?
Well, again, I mean, with the traditional label thing, and even the press, we unfortunately, an error in timing, we wound up being herded into this whole, like, grunge was really big at the time. And it really just kind of killed our momentum and left a lot of people, in marketing and promoting, like nobody really knew what to do with us. Like they tried to call us grunge and sort of, sneak us in there and hope that nobody noticed that we weren't. I think it was just the market for what we were doing was just really small. I don't think there was a big commercial audience out there for us at that time. And I mean, maybe there still isn't. I mean, I don't know. I know it doesn't get under my skin anymore. I'm just super fortunate that we, after all these years, like we get together and our relationship with one another is great. And we play really awesome music that we love and that we think is great. And, luckily, like I said earlier, I mean, enough people come out to these shows that we can afford to make a living And at the same time, we have a little money left over that we can put it into high quality production and go out there and put on like a really great show that people want to keep coming back to. It's like Field of Dreams. It's like Field of Dreams, like build it and they will come. We've managed to at least get to that phase where we get to control a lot of our infrastructure. It's on our own label, and we have a distribution deal. And we make our own videos, we make our own records, we put together all of our own tours and all of our own production. And so it's pretty, like everything we do is pretty internal.
Is it easier being a musician in 2016 than it was in 1994?
In some ways, in other ways, like being an adult, and having now there are just things that I'm not willing to put myself through. As an adult, there's certain things that I have to have, and I'm married and, I can't take the risks and I can't live on people's couches. And like things were definitely really, really easy back then because you didn't have a care in the world. Like you were kind of made of rubber, nothing could harm you and you could withstand a lot of turbulence and sort of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Uncertainty.
Not knowing what the outcome, uncertainty. Yeah. Like uncertainty was okay. That was part of the equation. Today there's really no room for uncertainty. You really have to kind of like pick the ball up and work extra time to make sure it keeps moving forward. And for whatever reason, things have really worked out for Failure. I mean, I certainly have no regrets. I think whatever did or didn't happen in 1996 is the reason that today, like, we're able to get together as three adults and just have such a great, productive relationship with one another and making music. It's a little more difficult because it's a lot more work,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, it's, what we get out of it is, I mean, you can't even really quantify it, It's like how many people get to say they get to do what they love to do for a living, and have people like come to your shows and just, like say how cool you are. Like, I don't think enough people just get that. I mean, I think there's so many awesome people in the world that like nobody says that you're awesome. So, it's pretty amazing.
When the Fantastic Planet vinyl release came out in 2010 and all the records sold out almost immediately, did that start the idea with the band? Like, okay, maybe we weren't forgotten.
Honestly, I didn't even know about it. I hadn't spoken to Ken or Greg in quite a while, and I know Ken and Greg hadn't spoken. And I think what happened is, this guy Grover, I can't remember what his real name was. Back in the day when we originally put the record out, he was a radio promotions guy at Warner Brothers. And at the re-release, he was higher up in the ranks. I think he was like a VP or something like that. And he came to Ken with the idea. And I think Ken kind of picked up the phone and told Greg, hey, this is what's going on. Do you want to do this? And yada, yada, yada. And I think they just got together for that moment to do it. And then, Greg had Autolux and Ken was like producing and mixing. And like I said, I wasn't even involved. Like I didn't even know. I was during that time, definitely not speaking to a whole lot of people and in my own sort of downward spiral. So when it did come out, like it was as much news to me as anyone who, was going to go to the store and buy it. What spurred the idea, or at least started, because there was a lot of acrimony between Ken and Greg, was for sure a big part of the reason for the band breaking up, because that relationship, without it, the band couldn't exist. And what happened is, let's see, their kids are like 7 now. So yeah, like probably maybe shortly after that, I think that opened up the door, and the two of them probably during that started talking, and they were both having children. And they started hanging out, just as friends, like the idea of playing together, wasn't even discussed. They were just, I think they had such a long relationship, and they had these, new children and all these things that, you can really only ask another guy that you feel super comfortable with. So I think that kind of rebuilt their relationship as friends. And I would say, let me see, in 2014, maybe the beginning of 2014, so they were hanging out together for like 3 or 4 years by that point, and Greg had just kind of out of nowhere asked Ken, hey, I've got a little time off. Would you be interested in getting together and, maybe just fooling around and writing and recording some stuff? So that's kind of how it happened. It was independent of the whole Fantastic Planet being re-released, but I think that being re-released is what got them back in the same room together.
Started the dialogue.
Yeah, because I know they hadn't spoken before that. I think, after the breakup, like I said, things were just really, really bad, and there were years and years and years where they didn't speak. I would speak to each one of them from time to time, or they would call me and we would speak, but the two of them, I don't think started to get into a same room until they had to work on that. Like, because they did that little movie for it. Ken did all the remastering for it himself. Greg wasn't present for it. But yeah, I mean, we have their kids, Molly and Ronan, to thank for us being able to just rebuild a relationship and get along as adults.
Thank goodness for play dates.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it was, like birthdays and play dates, and their kids were friends, so they were just kind of hanging out, being family members.
There's a story that part of the Failure reunion was due to Maynard from Tool, his 50th birthday celebration. That's what he asked for a birthday gift, was the reunion of Failure.
Yeah, I kind of recall that, and I think when he said that out loud, because originally, like I said, they had been working on some stuff, and they'd probably been writing together, and they had come up with like 3 or 4 songs, or 5 songs. 3 were finished, and at that point, Ken had called me and kind of filled me in. It was just, the conversation kind of went like, I thought he was calling me to have me play on something he was producing, honestly. I, in my wildest dreams, would have never thought that he was calling me to get the 3 of us back together to work on stuff. Like, that just didn't even cross my mind. That did not seem like a possibility. So I was quite surprised, and it was actually really weird for me, honestly. When he gave me the first 3 songs, I went into like kind of a spiral. Like, I was listening to this stuff, and I couldn't decide what it was. Like, it had sounded like nothing I'd never heard before, just because I had all these emotions behind it. I was just kind of like, oh, do I really want to do this? Like, should we just leave it alone? Is this any good? Like, I couldn't tell whether it was any good or not. Like, I was kind of freaked out, honestly.
You weren't able to have a perspective on it.
I had no perspective on it. And quite honestly, like maybe a year before that, some events in my life had turned around. I started to get my stuff together, and, I'd finally found myself in a place in life where I could reconcile the breakup of the band. It just seemed like this albatross that I dragged around for, the 10 years after we broke up.
Was it regret? Was it anger?
It was regret for all of the things that we didn't do that we would have done. It was anger at myself for, the breakup was just kind of like, this isn't working, we're breaking up. Like, in hindsight, like, it just didn't seem like any of us really fought for the band. It seemed like we put up with a lot of shit, when the band was like sort of being torn apart, but there was never that like, okay, well, this seems like a hopeless cause, but one last ditch effort, let's go to marriage counseling. It just didn't seem like anyone took that last and final step to save it. You know, we were all just kind of tired of everything. And I know I gave up pretty easily. Like, I didn't really fight for it, you know, and I think all of us probably felt, oh, you know, there's greener pastures out there. This isn't any big deal. And, you know, it seemed the longer it went on, the bigger deal it became. You know, there was the bigger after effect. The longer the band was broken up, the more painful it got.
Right. And the fact that several of the members weren't even speaking meant that there was a bit of a stalemate.
Yeah, it was just, you know, it was horrible. And people were like, oh, I love that band. And like, you really couldn't escape the idea that you left what seemed like the most important thing you had ever done unfinished.
So when you started hearing these tracks that became part of the LP, The Heart is a Monster,
mm-hmm.
that was difficult for you to take in and to deal with. How did you finally break through that?
I think I broke through it by, I stopped listening to the music, and I started thinking about, just more of what a great opportunity this would be, you know, despite what may or may not happen in the future with all of this. You know, the best part of this is going to be that the three of us get to be in the same room again, and we get to work together, and we get to have a really, really great time. And we get to rebuild a relationship, because we were all like really good friends, like outside of music, like, you know, especially in the early part of the band, like we had so much fun together. You know, so it was, I think the friendship became more important than the actual music. You know, we hadn't decided, like, maybe we were going to do an EP. And then, of course, we recorded the songs. As soon as we recorded them, that's when it dawned on me, like, how good I thought the stuff was. Like, it really clicked once I got in that zone of actually playing along with it, instead of being a spectator. But I think, you know, I don't think I got to that place of being able to hear and digest and decide whether it was good or not until we started to record it and I started to react to it on a like more visceral, musical, more like just sort of close your eyes, unconscious reaction, you know, to what was going on. That's when I finally internalized it and understood it, and fell in love with it. I think it's our best record.
Well, I wouldn't disagree. I think the growth between The Heart is a Monster and Fantastic Planet is similar to that between Fantastic Planet and the previous records. It really is
and magnified. Yeah.
Fans and critics have responded as well, similarly.
This cycle, the critics and the fans, like, it's just been totally insane. Like, you know, we made everyone's like top 10 or top 20 list at the end of last year, and the critical acclaim and just all the press was mind blowing. And you could tell, like, they were writing stuff not because they had to, because they genuinely had listened to the record and got it. Just some of the insight that people had when they were writing their articles was really, really genuine and believable. And the fans coming out and playing again, like, just people crying and just the emotional attachment that people have to our music. You know, when you're broken up and you're not playing, there's no way that you could know that exists. So that was a game changer when we started playing and touring again. Like, our shows are pretty, the emotional level is really, really over the top. And sometimes even for me, like, I have to make sure to pay as little attention as possible, because it really will distract me and throw me off my game, because it's just so overwhelming, the reaction that some of these people have. You know, it's humbling, to say the least. But it really, really gets to me. So I kind of have to, like, keep it, you know, in the corner of my eye, if at all, while we're playing. We live in a perfect world right now. I think. I think everything has aligned for us, professionally, and as a touring and recording band. Like, there are no complaints. If things kept on like they are right now, we'd be perfectly happy and content.
That's fantastic to hear. And I do want to talk to you a little bit about your record collection, but first off, let me quickly share that Failure is on a tour, the 20th anniversary of Fantastic Planet. Yep. And I got to tell you, it is. I'm very envious of the people who can make it to these shows. Hopefully, you guys will make it to Australia at some point. But I actually had the opportunity to see Failure back in the day. In fact, I think I may have seen one of your very last shows at Lollapalooza. It was Lollapalooza in Mountain View. And
oh yeah, that was the last show.
Was that the very last show, or?
Yeah, that was the very last show of Lollapalooza. Yeah, that was it. We actually were going to break up before Lollapalooza. Ken and I had a discussion, and we had both agreed that let's just stick it out for Lollapalooza, and we'll go out on top. Like, at least we have control over that. But yeah, that was it.
Yeah, because I remember you guys were on headlining the secondary stage. I think I blew off Snoop Dogg or whoever was on the main stage. I went to see you guys, and just right up front, you guys were ending the show with the Depeche Mode cover. And it was a hypnotic experience, but you guys looked pissed.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of that back then.
That was the tip of the tumor. So, but it was a great show. I think that was probably one of twice I saw you guys. Fantastic concerts, and I can only imagine that your current concerts are, even elevated, and you guys are spiritually even more connected or in a better place there. So I would encourage everyone.
For sure.
I would encourage everyone to check out the tour dates. I'll make sure to post them on thevinylguide.com. Go out and see Failure, and make sure to also check out the Heart is a Monster LP. It's actually on Failure's website for $30. So exactly what Kellii said. Again, remarkable LP, beautifully sounding, 180 gram heavy-weighted vinyl. It sounds brilliant.
And I think they're clear, too. I think they're clear vinyl also.
Oh, excellent. Even better. Yeah. And you can still find a copy of Fantastic Planet out there. Hopefully people listening will be able to find one for under $100 somewhere.
So if they come out to the shows, we're going to be selling some at the shows.
Ooh.
For I think like maybe $25, which is a good deal for a double vinyl.
Of Fantastic Planet.
Yeah. A Fantastic Planet double vinyl. That's what was Fantastic Planet? It was like an hour and 6 minutes worth of music. There's 18 songs on there. Yeah, the last record is like 108 minutes.
Oh, fantastic!
We like making records. We definitely like making the long format album. Is like, we love that.
The perfect medium.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your record collection, Kellii. You're a bit of a record collector. How many records do you have, and how would you describe your selection?
How many records do I have? I probably have, I'd say, close to 1,000 records, and very eclectic. Well, you know what? Actually, in the bigger scheme of people who like really, really collect records, like, it's probably not that eclectic. Like, there's
what did you listen to this week?
What did I listen to this week? I listened to the new Teen record on vinyl. Have you heard that band? Out of they live in Brooklyn. They're from, I believe, Nova Scotia. They're three sisters.
Okay.
They're called Teen, T-E-E-N, and they kind of sound like Kate Bush meets early Prince.
Ooh.
They are so good. Their latest record is just an absolute gem. The production, the songwriting, all three of them sing. Their harmonies are just crazy. What else I listen to? My wife is a big Warpaint fan, so we got the new Warpaint record, which is pretty cool. I haven't gotten through the whole thing yet because What did I get this week? I just got the first Prince record on vinyl this week in the mail. I also got two Beastie Boys. They just re-released all their stuff. I got Paul's Boutique and Ill Communication on vinyl.
Must-haves.
I've got License to Ill is coming, and I ordered not Violator. I got what's that? Depeche Mode. Music for the Mass.
Yep.
And one of their early ones, the Business one. I'm not familiar with that record. I saw it on eBay, and they've reissued all their stuff on 180 gram vinyl. So I'm just going for a grab. Actually, I think when I get home, I'm going to wind up getting. I also got 101 on vinyl, the Depeche Mode live record from I think it's 1989 at the Rose Bowl. What else have I been listening to?
As a drummer, what are some of the top drumming records you like to visit?
Well, of course, any Led Zeppelin. You know, listening to John Bonham always puts me in the right place, especially if I'm going into like if I'm going to be working on music, like rock music. Like there's nothing better to listen to as a warm up for like where you should be at when you're playing, just the feeling and the amount of space. But I also love listening to a good Rush record. You know, there's nothing like listening to Neil Peart. It's just so like his boundless musicality is. I'm totally envious how he manages to fit in all those notes without sounding like overly busy or like sticking out from the rest of the band. What else? I was checking out a little bit of Synchronicity last week. Stewart Copeland is always puts a little fire in my pants. Just his energy. He's got such great, like, just plays on top of everything. And who else? One of my favorite drummers, and I actually don't even know his name. The drummer, one of the brothers from Blonde Redhead.
Not familiar with that.
Do you know that? Do you know that guy's name?
No, I don't.
It's the two twin brothers. One of them is the guitar player singer, and there's the Japanese girl that plays bass and keys, and then the other twin plays drums. And his style, he does this thing. It's kind of along the lines of what Radiohead does, where he just really locks into this super simple, groovy thing, and pretty much barely changes it. It becomes this hypnotic state where he plays it through the entire song. Like there'll be little variations on it from part to part. But for the most part, like he always manages to find like the most beautiful drum line, and it's so good that he doesn't have to do anything else. I've really gotten into like that kind of aspect of playing, more, I think, as I've gotten older. And even like, you know, the guy from Radiohead kind of does the same thing, where it's just so good what he plays that he can just play that. What else? Phil Rudd, you know, always has a soft spot in my heart from AC/DC. You know, that's pretty much how I learned how to play the drums. I think my older brother gave me a copy of Highway to Hell on vinyl when I was probably, I don't know, I'd say 11 or 12. All my old Kiss records, you know, that was sort of like my little kid band that I just absolutely adored. I mean, that's where I got the rock bug from. Just running home from school every single day and playing dress up to, like, you know, Kiss concerts, Kiss Alive and Kiss Alive 2. And that gave me the bug of wanting to be like a live performer, rock star, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Kiss was that interesting kind of gateway band that they were half band, half comic book. And
yeah,
it's so inspirational for a lot of people. Musically, you know, give or take, but they really kind of made the concert bigger.
They had some okay, like really dark riffs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, their lyrics, like, they weren't really all that deep. They were just sort of, you know, what rock dudes were talking about in the 70s.
Libido-esque.
You know, girls and partying. And but they were, and I didn't realize this obviously as a kid, but they were an entirely manufactured band. Like, they didn't make a move that wasn't planned. You know, it was all about selling stuff, which kind of broke my heart a little bit when I found out just how plodding and just as a matter of fact they were about just making money.
You looked behind the curtain.
Yeah, but good for them. I mean, I think in 1976 they each made like $24 million, which back then was, I mean, that was a lot of loot.
Hey, now I heard also you got a chance to work with Dr. Dre. Is that correct?
I did. Yes, I used to do all of, I was Linda Perry's studio drummer. Like, I did a lot of the Christina Aguilera and like Leona Lewis and James Blunt and KT Tunstall and just all of the records that she was writing and producing with different artists. And as a result of that, I became really close friends with her string section. It's called the Section Quartet. Who, if you haven't heard of them, you should check them out. They're not your normal like hoity-toity string type people. They all grew up like loving like early rock, kind of, you know, like me and Eric, the leader, both loved Iron Maiden and Kiss when we were kids. Like, we have so much in common. And he and I became really close friends and started doing a lot of work together on different things. And he invited me. He had gotten hired by Dre to work on the record, and they did all the strings on Linda's records. Is pretty much how we met and started to become really good friends. And he just called me up one day and was like, "Hey, dude, I need you to show up at Capitol. We've got a 45-minute session. That means you've got to get your drums set up, mic'd, and that'll probably leave us 20 minutes to basically track this song," which freaked me out a little bit. It was me and a 72-piece orchestra in the big room at Capitol Studios, like the one you always see in all the old, you know, all your greatest musicians and, you know, all the people you grew up loving playing, like, you know, it's just one of those.
It's a legendary
studios, like
room.
One of those big Hollywood. Yeah. And it was honestly, at the time, it was pretty nerve-wracking, and it wasn't the funnest thing in the world to do. Like, I was pretty beside myself. It was a very high-pressure situation, but definitely something I will never, ever, ever forget. And Dre was there. He didn't really say much, just like, "Hey, man, you know, you're going to kill it," or something like that. And what we were doing was we were recreating, what was that Sam Cooke song? A Time Is Gonna Come? Is that what it's called? But we were recreating the beginning of that, and he had the original engineer that had engineered and recorded that record in Capitol Studios in the 60s. So it's just this like really big, crazy, grand thing. And I'm like looking at the conductor, and he's like, "Dude, don't look at me. I'm looking at you." And I'm like, "What do you mean you're looking at?" He's like, "I'm looking at you. Like, what I'm doing up here with the wand, like, doesn't matter. Everyone's following you, not me."
You're the timekeeper.
Which that was kind of weird too. So yeah, I mean, that was cool. I have no idea whether it wound. It was supposed to be on that new record that he just put out like last year.
The soundtrack to his movie, I think, is what he was.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was for.
All right, Kellii, thank you so much for sharing the stories and talking to us about not only your career, but also the band Failure, the whole arc of things. It was a real revealing conversation, and really happy to hear that you guys are back in a good space. I want to make sure to share that Failure is touring right now. Go to failureband.com. And you can see all the different tour dates. And if they get anywhere near you, I mean, within a day's drive, make sure you check them out. But there will be some records for sale there. And from what Kellii said, really good deals, particularly on Fantastic Planet and The Heart is a Monster. So make sure you check them. And they're just such a fantastic band live. So Kellii, thank you so much. Do you think we'll hear another record from Failure in the future?
You certainly will. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I'm very certain that hopefully the beginning of next year we'll start working on something new. You know, maybe March at the latest. It usually takes us a couple months to like write and record something. I think we've got something new in mind, which we've already spoken about for this next one. So it may take us a little longer to write and record this one because it's quite a bit more ambitious than anything we've done before. But yeah, we're not even close to being done.
That's great to hear. Kellii, thank you so much. I'm going to let you go, and good luck with the gigs, and some of the Vinyl Guide listeners will see you at those.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to your listeners.